the deficit and national debt. Now, you may have heard about both the deficit and the national debt in the news, but what is the difference between the two and why should you be concerned about them? First, the deficit is an annual amount where the expenses exceed tax revenues, which means the government is going to borrow money to pay for the amount of expenses that exceed those tax revenues. Deficits create debt, which costs taxpayers money because we have to pay the interest on the debt. Thus, you need to pay more in taxes to cover the interest payments on the debt incurred. When you run consistent deficits, it presents a major problem for the country as they can eventually cause serious inflation. Here's a chart of the deficits from 2017 to 2021 to give you an idea. Now, because of all those deficits year over year, we now have a national debt that is over $30 trillion. Each year we run a deficit, the larger the debt gets. Here's a chart showing the growth of the national debt. Now, here are some facts about the deficits and national debt. For fiscal 2021, the deficit was $2.8 trillion and the national debt was at $22 trillion held by the public, and the actual debt was about $28.4 trillion. While most of this debt was incurred from 2009 to 2022, the federal funds interest rate was almost 0% during this time, so the cost of interest payments was very low. Now think about this. With the Federal Reserve having to raise interest rates in 2022, each additional 1% it raises interest rates on the current debt of $30 trillion will cost an additional $300 billion in interest annually, which will either cause spending to be cut, taxes to be raised, or more debt to be incurred so that the interest on that debt can be paid. Pain will be felt in the near term if taxes are raised or spending has to be cut from one of the other priorities. Now, if more debt is printed to cover interest, then severe economic ramifications will be felt at some time in the future. And lastly, this debt does not take into account the $100+ trillion of estimated unfunded liabilities the federal government has to pay out in the future. I know these items may sound like a big deal to you guys, but this is why you should really care about the deficits in the national debt. The more debt incurred and the more money that's printed, the more the dollar is devalued, which gives you less purchasing power, thus makes you poorer and see inflation. The more debt incurred, the more interest needs to be paid, so taxes will eventually need to be raised on everyone, making you poorer. And finally, the more debt incurred, the greater chance the economy suffers long term, which will negatively impact many people from a financial position. By the way, this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. This is a United States problem, as both parties have been reckless in spending over the years, so please pay attention to what the government is doing about spending.